Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me on this program. Today, I have the honor and the pleasure of interviewing Mara Adamitz Scrupe. She is a poet, she is an author, she is a painter, and let me read a little bit of her background here. Mara Adamitz Scrupe is a visual art and poet whose art exhibitions have received wide critical acclaim with prominent and permanent commissions on her environmental public art projects in the US, Europe, and China. Her essays and critical reviews have been published in magazines and periodicals and reprinted in art history volumes. Mara has taught and lectured nationally and internationally. She teaches and mentors students studying a range of disciplines across the university's curricula, including visual arts, design, writing, dance, music, and theater, and God knows what else. That makes you a Renaissance woman. If there's the qualifications for it, that is definitely it. But on top of that, I've also had the pleasure of coming to meet you through a project that Thelma T. Reyna put together from the Golden Foothills Press, which she put down a book, When the Virus Came Calling, which highlighted many poets, outstanding poets, and you were one of them that we highlighted before. So we invite people to view that one. You have two books out, and I've managed to go through half of them because I really have to keep going back over and over because this is very insightful. The first one, Eat Tomorrow. That's a copy. I like that. And then your newer book that I have, In the Bare Bones House of Was, poems. And I hope you read, one of your poems today. Mara, let me take you back to your first moments when you decided to pick up a pencil and either do art or read or write, or what inspired you to go into this world of being a writer, a poet, going into academia? What inspired you?
Well, I think it's every artist. I've heard it said that every artist becomes an artist out of a need to express experiences that may have had a deep impact early in their lives. And in my case, that's certainly true. My family, I was raised by a single working mom. My dad had a lot of substance abuse issues and some psychological problems, very troubled, deeply troubled. And, that really impacted, I think, the way that I saw the world as a child and how I viewed interactions in my family and beyond, just between people. From that time, my father was also a musician, which, in reference to your question, it's the closest, I think, example of what prompted me to think about expressing one's emotions, one's feelings, one's responses to experience through music. So I started out, as I mentioned to you, I think we talked about this, I'm an accordionist, and that's a very peculiar instrument, I realize, more popular now than it's been in a long time. But I started out playing when I was maybe 4 or younger. I don't ever remember a time when I didn't play music or sing, or, I wasn't involved in some kind of musical activity. And I did that exclusively for many, many years. I didn't really come from a family where the arts, writing or theater or visual art, were well represented or really even thought much about. So it wasn't really until I was in probably high school that I started to write, mostly poetry, a lot of pieces that were sort of reflective of my experience up to that point. And, I think all young writers look back on their work and think, oh my gosh, I hope no one ever reads this. I hope no one ever sees it, right? I just sort of stumbled across some pieces that I'd done when I was in high school, maybe in the 11th or 12th grade. And actually, they're not so different from what I write about today. I wrote a lot about nature, about interactions between myself and the world that surrounded me, whether it was a social world or a natural world. So, that kind of interplay was very present in the work then, and it continues to be today. I didn't get to visual art until I was in college. I attended Macalester College, which is a small private liberal arts school in St. Paul, Minnesota. Great school, wonderful school. And I got involved in visual art then, and it just sort of snowballed from there. I think at each juncture along the path of my life, I've encountered possibilities. Something will present itself. For example, when I was in college, I took a ceramics course. It was one of those things where, I had an elective that I could fill, and I just thought, well, why not? It sounds good. And I loved it. And from that moment, that was really the launch. I began to think about art a lot, about visual art, about drawing, and, as you say, painting and making sculptural pieces and so on. And really that was my creative world, that along with performance, for probably the first, 15 years out of college. And then, I came back to writing much later, actually only in the last probably 10 years, mostly because I have a physical condition. I have a medical condition that is rheumatoid. And I had been making, you mentioned these environmental installations that I had done. I'd been doing those for a number of years all over the world, these really large site-specific works involving plant materials, and they're gardens, more or less, on my website, which is scrupe.com, scrupe.com, really easy to find. Lots of examples of that. Really hard work, really hard physical work. I'm not a large person to start with. And then I discovered that I was stricken actually with this condition, and we finally figured out what it is, and it's very controllable. As I mentioned, I'm a runner and very physically active, but all the combination of things I was doing was just too hard. I couldn't continue to do that kind of work and stay healthy and continue to work and be an academic in another area of my life that I was really committed to. So I began to think about, well, what can I do creatively now that will not only address this issue that I have, this medical issue, but also that I can do alongside being an academic, being a professor, eventually a dean. All that work is very time consuming and is really rewarding, but takes a lot out of a person. So I thought, well, what's something that I can do anywhere at any time? If I'm in my office at the university and I've got an hour to spare, what can I do in that hour? Well, you can't go out and make site installations. You can't do that. And, it's pretty hard to make a painting, but it's really, really accessible to do some writing. You can sit down for a few minutes and jot down some ideas. And, that's how it really started about 10 or 12 years ago. I didn't know if I was any good. I'd never published anything. I'd always written. Through those years, I'd written some scholarly essays, really, I'd call them, for journals and magazines and so on. And that sort of thing, I think if you're an academic, you get the rules. The rules are pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. However, literature is a different thing, especially poetry. And there's so many ways in which contemporary poetry has embraced so many voices, so many different ways of speaking. I think that anthology that you mentioned really represents such a cross section of approaches to the writing of poetry. So, I really didn't know what I was doing, but as is my wont, I just launched myself and started writing and understood that, well, if you really want to test yourself, you start to send your work to magazines and see, if they're interested. And I started to do that, and I got a ton of rejections, a million rejections. Everybody out there, rejections, savor them. Everyone you learn something from, especially those where an editor or a publisher is willing to make some real comments about what you've done. I liked this, but it was a little bit, hard to grasp, or I didn't understand your point, or whatever. So, I continued, and lo and behold, it wasn't too long, and the work was getting published, and then books came, and it's just really the thing that I can say about writing and getting one's work out there. And I realized that not all of us necessarily want to be published. Mm-hmm. I did. I wanted to be published, and who knows why, but I did. And I think many artists do.
I like that comment. I don't know why, but I did.
It's very personal. The first book that I published, full collection, was, I guess, 5 years ago. It's called Beast, and it's probably by far the most personal collection of pieces I've ever written. And after it was published, I was like completely, as the Irish say, gobsmacked. I couldn't, I almost couldn't function. I didn't know whether to be embarrassed or be proud. It was just such, it was like sort of opening your chest and saying, here's everything that's inside, right? So, I mean, I think publishing it is frightening for all of us. I guess it didn't stop me, but I think that over time, with more publication and more books and so on, one becomes more accustomed to that feeling, because after all, artists are all about, I guess, it's what I tell my students. You can make art for yourself, and that's great if that's what you want to do, but most of us want an audience. Most of us want to speak to somebody.
And you're open to judgment.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's it.
You're pushing judgment.
It's very revealing.
What made you, you mentioned your personal disability, or whatever you're dealing with. Why do you think the study of nature is so critical, besides just looking at yourself?
Yeah, I think, well, I have this theory, and some scientists are studying this, this theory of genetic memory, which it goes something like this, that you are born with memories that came before you in one way or another, experiences that are somehow embedded in you genetically. It's a crazy idea, but I think that in my life, I have no other way of understanding the things that have motivated me. I was born and raised more or less in the outskirts of a city. Both sides of my family were farmers. In fact, there's a whole side of my family that still are farmers in northern Minnesota. I made a feature-length documentary that was just released earlier this year called Love Letter to Leader. I think you can find it streaming somewhere. It's really about the experience of living and working in nature and my family's lives. It's not really about me, but I grew up visiting with my extended family in northern Minnesota, spending time with them. They had dairy farms. They grew all kinds of different crops. And I think that somehow that experience and the people that came before them on both sides really sort of somehow embedded themselves in me. And I can't remember a time growing up when I didn't want to live in a rural place. I certainly like the city. I've spent many years in the city and teaching in very urban environments and so on, and I've had apartments and condos and everything else. But where my soul is in the country, and it's where I do my best writing, I think, as well. So really, I think nature for me came from both from example in my own family and the history of my family going back several generations, and also my real-time experiences in nature. My husband and I bought a very old farm in Central Virginia about 30 years ago, and it was a teardown. It's a terrible place, a horrible place. Anybody else with any sense would have taken it down right now, but we didn't have that much sense. So we spent a long time working on it, and it sits on a really nice 50-acre plot, and we're right on the James River. I'm looking out at the river right now. And I think that living in that environment for so long and experiencing the day-to-day shifts and changes of nature have had a tremendous impact on how I think, how I write, how I look. I think when we live in very quiet, more rural places, there's less happening fast. Things happen kind of slowly, but they happen. We have to be very, very observant. And I think I've learned to be a better looker living in a rural place. And being a better looker is really important for a poet. It's important to notice, to see.
I went back east once when my daughter started attending college in Boston. I'm a Californian boy. My whole life is Southern California. So, when I went there in the winter, I realized what must have encouraged or motivated Robert Frost to write as well, because that there is not much to do out here. You have to
Yeah,
stay warm.
yeah, yeah.
So, but we don't appreciate what you go through. As people tell me from back east, oh, we experienced the four seasons. I said, well, we only have two here in this area. So I
Yeah,
think you're absolutely right. I think if you're in
yeah.
tune with nature, or you're in tune with the seasons and what's going on, I could see how that can be very inspirational.
It is, and I think also that having been born and raised in Minnesota, in the coldest place, among the coldest places in the nation, in the farthest north, you know, I think one has a kind of connection, a hopeless connection with nature, because nature is pretty darn hopeless. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. It's coming at you. If there's a blizzard coming, it's coming. There's nothing you can do. It's hopeless. And in a way, I think that's an incredible lesson to learn, that you can't change it. You just have to figure out how to go with it, how to live with it, how to shift yourself in a direction that can not only live with it but really contemplate it. Some of my best memories are blizzards. You know, it's like the most amazing thing in the world. You know, you're out of luck, but there you are. You know, so I mean, yeah, I think weather and nature, and anybody from Minnesota, if anybody from Minnesota sees this, they'll know exactly what I mean. The first thing anybody up there says to you is like, how's the weather where you are? That's the first thing, because weather is central. It's central to life
Yes.
experience, you know. And I think in the times I've spent in California, I've been fortunate to be an artist in residence at the Drosy Foundation, at Montalvo, and various other places there. And it's just amazing. I mean, the air, everything is so different from the East Coast and the Middle West. But, you know, it is, again, a different experience of nature, though Californians have their own challenges as well.
Oh, absolutely. Somebody once said, California can go months without clouds. I said, I've lived here my whole life. What do you mean? He says, yeah, I've never lived somewhere where day after day after day, there's no clouds. And then I started to focus on that, and I realized it was true. We can go a whole month and
Really?
not see one cloud. I thought,
Yeah.
now I'm starting to get troubled with that. Let me take you to another point, which you just mentioned on the book where we met originally when the virus came calling, the COVID-19 Strikes America. You mentioned right now history. Would you consider COVID to be part of nature?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I again, as a reader of history, and someone that really has always enjoyed reading deeply, I think that I've heard many people refer to this as sort of the crisis of a lifetime, and it probably is for many of us. I was even talking to my mother recently about this. My mother is 90, by the way, so she's seen
Wow.
some life. Um, and she said to me, "Well, this is the worst thing that's ever happened, you know, in my life." And I said, "But Mom, you know, you went through the Great Depression. You know, you lived through World War II. You know, what? It just seems like those things, simply by virtue of the fact that they lasted so much longer, would have made a much stronger impression." And you know, I think what she was saying is that it was so sudden and irrefutable, and it's not something that COVID is. We are vectors as human beings, but we don't really have any control over it, you know, until we get the vaccine, and that happens. So, you know, when we talk about COVID, yes, it is, it was released by nature. It jumped. That's what the scientists think. It jumped from another species to us. I think the thing that to pay most attention to here, and this is already proving true in the UK with these new strains that are being discovered. I think we humans actually, you know, have to deal with something perhaps more long lasting than this particular virus, which is to say that, as far as I understand it, most scientists are are suggesting that this is only the first of any number of viruses that, because of the strictures placed on the animal world, will jump to humans. You know, it's about the loss of nature and space for other species. And as, of course, they become, closer to us and closer to us, and we closer to them, it's sort of inevitable. So, I mean, I think that's what I think a lot about, is how do we deal with that? How do we deal with loss of land and, resources for other species?
I'm so glad that someone like you is bringing that consciousness and keeping us remembering that. But I'd like to say a little story here. My son attended Harvard as an organic chemistry student. And I asked him, so I referred to him a great deal, and I asked him about 10 years ago, I said, how many pandemics are possible in the US, in the world? He said 10. And the reason I asked him at that time is because the Ebola was starting to come out of Africa. Yeah. So I thought, it got contained, but it already gave me the story or the background that nature has its own rules and regulations. We seem to have controlled it in Africa, but there's nothing to say it couldn't have gone out. So I wasn't really terribly shocked when actually this one came out. It was just, as humans, we weren't listening.
I agree, and that's a really insightful thought. You had asked about. Well, I think there's as we all know, there's a long history of plague-like situations, across the world since, the probably recorded history, the 12th century, maybe even a lot earlier than that. We think about the plagues that roiled through Europe. There were many of them. There wasn't just one, and there were many different strains. So, no, this is by no means, the first, and it won't be the last. Will there be 10? Will there be fewer? I don't know. But I think it's a heads up. I think that's what you're saying. It's a heads up. And we should be paying greater attention to our interactions with the natural world, because that's where this is coming from.
Well, we had a discussion once before where I think you put it very well. He says, if we forget history, we forget this is not new. We're just experiencing it ourselves. But this is really not new, as which you just mentioned right now.
No, and it's not nearly as tragic as, in Europe. And I think don't quote me, 14th or 15th century, over half the population was lost.
We calculate 50 million people died.
When you think about that, it's just, well, I don't know. I don't have words for that. I've read about how, historians at that time would, tell stories or relate experiences that they had walking the countryside. And there are no people left to work the fields. There's no, so, I mean, in a way, we're fortunate. We're lucky. I mean, we have technology, we have communication, we can talk to each other. We can say, Fauci can tell us, don't do this, do that. This is serious. So in some ways, I think we're in better shape. It's not easy though, is it?
No, it's not. But that's because we're going through it. But, like you say, it gives us an understanding of the people in the past when there was no information. No one knew when it would end. No one knew what would end. It was really great. I have a favor to ask. Can I ask you to do a readings of one of your wonderful books? Either one.
Sure.
One of your poems that touches yours.
Choose one.
Also touches your soul. Gosh, if I had another show, I'd ask you the title on this one. The title of Eat the Marrow. I mean, that was like, whoa, that caught my attention. And as I started reading them, it's like, whoa, these grabbed my throat.
Well, I had a poet friend tell me that I write hard, and I do. I'm kind of
very true.
I'm kind of relentless, and again, every poet has a voice. I don't know which poet said this, so I'm going to just slaughter the way that I express it, but something to the effect of, I'm not necessarily here to give you the good news, and that's what I think about, when I write. I think there are many really fine poets that one would read, before going to bed at night to have sweet dreams, right? Yeah. My sister-in-law recently said to me, she read this one in the Bare Bones House of Was, and said, not bedtime reading. No, you know,
She
and
was
she's right.
right. She
Yeah,
was
she was
right.
right.
This is,
But
yeah,
I'm
this
going to
is
read
good.
one that's not quite so
No,
so
if you
tough.
say, spare me somewhere, you don't do it. I like that. You go for the jugular. I see that.
So this one is called Groundhog Laws of Contiguity. Around here, we have so many stories. We crumple them up and burn them for kindling. We loan them out to the woodchucks tunneling under the house, a tight-lipped bunch. They have so few of their own. In this vicinity, we call out tidings to the whirling woods, to grackles, evangelist posses haranguing limb to limb, guano dropping, lore seeding, random neighbors on our rural route. Around here, we have more rumors than an apartment house, more anecdotes than a coffee shop, more paraphrase than a bank branch manager, more promise than a big box store, than an outlet mall. In this neck of the woods, we divulge, recount, rehash, confess, episodically, incidentally, fervidly, over coffee cake in the kitchen wearing worn slippers, lengths of silent sip. Around here we have church chat, licentious as loose strife, common as vetch, vigorous as periwinkle, sad as spurge. We have post office gossip, motley as spring pinks in rot-rich soil, hardware store hearsay, shameless as bloodroot. We have clotheslines, calumny, candid as mayapple, coy as trillium, sour as skunk cabbage, meddling as ivy, irascible as burdock, wanton as putty root orchids. Around here, we listen. Close, pay attention, attend, lend an ear, hearken, mind and mark, conscientiously, faithfully, regardfully, particularly. Around here, we're accountable as rememberers.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Very touching.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're about to close the show. Sort of choked up. I really do enjoy your poetry.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wish you continued success. I look forward to your future books as well. And in closing, what advice can you give that you gave your students or anyone, any person that is thinking about putting their thoughts, their soul, their emotions into a book and sharing it with the world?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think that's such an important question for all creative people. And I suppose the trajectory of my creative life has been based on a kind of a single helpless quality that I have that is, I think, the root of what's allowed me to make work, whatever kind of work it is. And really, that is just to go at it full tilt. Just say what you want to say. Do not edit yourself. Do not compare yourself. Don't look at someone else and say, I want to write like that, or I want to make art like that. That can be an inspiration. I read widely, as we said, and I do find so much inspiration in looking at other kinds of work. But in the end, your own voice is the most important thing. If you've never encountered anyone else who's making paintings like you are, or who's making poems like you are, or whatever, music, good. Keep pushing that. Keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. Make your voice the voice that you most want to express in the world, because that's the true voice. That's the voice that others ultimately, I think, will hear, will listen to.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've had the pleasure of not only enjoying but learning as well, and exploring new worlds and how you see the world, um, and how we must speak, how each individual who is, I guess what I learned, and I'm having a lot of thoughts at the same time. Expression can come on words, can come in taking care of your plants can come through ceramics, can come through artwork. And it doesn't have to be something that the world sees or admires or critiques, but it's an expression of self. And I think that's what I get from you.
Yes.
The importance of
Yes.
expression of self, that first and foremost is one of our responsibilities to ourselves. Not just a pleasure, but I think we must do it. I think we
And
live
it's a
to that.
gift. It's a gift to the world. If you choose to share it, it's a gift to the world.
A gift to the world. I'm going to walk away with that thought. It's a gift to the world. You are a gift to the world. We all are. We
Thank
all
you.
can contribute something as well. So
And
thank you.
thank you for your time today. I've enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking to Renaissance woman, Mara Adamitz Scrupe. And again, before we close, what is your website again, please?
It's scrupe.com, scrupe.com.
Mara, thank you for your time, also for being with us. And I look forward to having you in future shows as well.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mara. And continue to be safe. And we've got to have you back on the show again.
I would enjoy that very much.
Gracias.
Thank you.